Hi, today we're going to introduce, assess the significance of, and discuss the different factors of the San Juan and Trabuco Creek Watershed Steelhead Recovery Project. This project focuses on the San Juan Creek watershed. The San Juan Creek watershed is a 176 square mile catchment area which contains San Juan, Trabuco, and Oso creeks. Its main tributary, San Juan Creek, originates in the Santa Ana Mountains district of the Cleveland National Forest. The lower reaches of San Juan and Trabuco creeks have been degraded, while the upper reaches of San Juan and Trabuco creeks and their tributaries remain fairly intact. San Juan, Trabuco, nearby San Mateo, and San Onofre creeks all had consistent steelhead runs up until at least the late 1940s. The decline in steelhead is a result of agriculture, mining, urban development, migration barriers such as the Trabuco Creek at Interstate 5 culvert, degraded stream habitat, decreased stream flow, and degraded water quality. California southern steelhead were listed as an endangered species in 1997. Their southern range was extended to the U.S.-Mexico border in 2002, and their endangered status was reaffirmed in January of 2006. It is highly important that the pristine condition of the upper watershed be preserved to facilitate steelhead recovery in the San Juan Creek watershed. Quality riparian corridor habitat needs to be preserved, especially along the developed reaches of the watershed, where habitat degradation has severed the natural ecosystems associated with the upstream reaches from the lower majority of the watershed. There are three portions of both San Juan and Trabuco creeks, the two largest tributaries to the San Juan Creek watershed, that are intended for habitat restoration. An upstream portion of both creeks will be restored by this project. The intended restoration of the upstream portion for both creeks lies upstream of development in the Santa Ana Mountains, which is fundamental to maintaining the pristine natural spawning habitat for rearing steelhead trout in the San Juan Creek watershed. Additionally, two lower portions of both San Juan and Trabuco creeks are intended for habitat restoration. Both intended lower restoration portions for both creeks lie within the developed reaches of the watershed. These lower portions are highly significant to improving and connecting rearing steelhead habitat from the mouth of the watershed to the pristine spawning habitat in the upper reaches of the watershed within the Santa Ana Mountains and the Cleveland National Forest. Restoration of the upper, middle, and lower portions of both San Juan and Trabuco creeks include, firstly, a habitat assessment by field survey of the water quality, supply, and temperature of all three intended restoration portions for both creeks. Restoration includes, next, removal of invasive exotic vegetative species along the riparian corridors of the watershed. This is an effort that is fundamental to maintaining optimal habitat for steelhead trout within the watershed. Invasive vegetative species that have degraded creek habitat for steelhead along the San Juan Creek watershed include, namely, pampas grass and giant reed. Giant reed has significantly degraded riparian wetland habitat along the San Juan Creek watershed, as its expansion is rapid and its behavior is to dominate native vegetation. Both pampas grass and giant reed are extremely successful at dominating native vegetation due to their wind-blown seeding behaviors. The result of giant reed proliferation and pampas grass proliferation is a degraded monoculture habitat that provides little to no creek canopy cover, which is a riparian aquatic habitat component that is essential for steelhead trout that depend on lower water temperatures and higher organic matter inputs by such canopy cover. Steelhead habitat is also dependent on large woody debris, which is typically abundant in a healthy riparian corridor vegetated with willows, alders, sycamores, bay laurels, oaks, and other native trees. Because giant reed is an invasive grass species, it contributes no woody debris to steelhead habitat. Over time, this proliferation of these grass-invasive species eliminates woody debris inputs to the riparian corridors of the San Juan Creek watershed. Reestablishment of native vegetation along the riparian corridors of the watershed will sustain optimal habitat conditions for steelhead as well as restore the primary production level of the wetland ecosystems associated with the watershed. The other main objective of the San Juan and Trabuco Creek Watershed Steelhead Recovery Project is to reconstruct one of the most significant fish passage barriers in Southern California. This fish passage barrier is the Interstate 5, or I-5, bridge array on Trabuco Creek. Fish passage at this project site has among the greatest potential in the region to contribute to recovery of the endangered Southern California steelhead, as it would reconnect current steelhead populations to their historic range of the upper reaches of the watershed. These upper reaches of the watershed are where optimal spawning habitat still exists for steelhead trout. Once the fragmented habitats of the lower and upper reaches of the watershed are reconnected, the impacts of such fish passage barriers are unlikely to reoccur and will leverage any additional upstream fish passage barrier removal in the public lands of the Cleveland National Forest. Cal Trout, the leading grantee of the project, is implementing Phase 1 of this project, which entails technical studies and engineering design for passage of juvenile and adult steelhead through this complex fish passage barrier. This project will integrate into large-scale channel infrastructure, water supply, and flood control projects in South Orange County. The final objective of the San Juan and Trabuco Creek Watershed Steelhead Recovery Project includes the assessment and restoration of the San Juan Creek Lagoon. The San Juan Creek Lagoon consists of approximately 3 acres located at the mouth of San Juan Creek at Doheny State Beach. Highly impacted with sediment, the lagoon is currently devoid of aquatic vegetation and habitat for fish, although there is potential for restoration of the federally endangered steelhead trout and tidewater goby. The lagoon is closed to the ocean most of the time by the beach sand berm, but the subsequent buildup of water causes it to break periodically, or it is intentionally breached for safety reasons. Just upstream, the lower 2.6 miles of San Juan Creek are channelized for flood control. Prior to channelization in 1962, much of the area outside of the floodplain was in agricultural use as crop production since the late 1800s. Currently, approximately 80% of the land adjacent to the channel is in residential or commercial use. The San Juan Creek Lagoon presents several limiting factors to steelhead recovery in the San Juan Creek watershed, including degraded habitat, impaired water quality, and a fish passage barrier to the ocean. Just upstream of the lagoon, Orange County Flood Control is planning to increase the flood conveyance capacity of the lower San Juan Creek trapezoidal channel by making the banks vertical and turning the creek into a rectangular channel. This work will alter flow velocity and depths and create an additional fish passage barrier. This lagoon project is proposed as a phased project, where Phase 1 includes public outreach and education, baseline mapping, collection of existing data, habitat, hydrologic and sediment transport evaluation, and pilot habitat improvements including floating island projects. Phase 2 of the project includes public outreach and education program implementation, the design and construction of restoration projects, including sediment removal, alteration of existing in-stream structures and/or installation of new structures to address sedimentation and bank stabilization issues, creation of refugia in the form of pools and backwater areas to address flow velocity and depth problems from channel alteration, and native plantings in-stream and in riparian areas to restore wetland habitat for native fish and wildlife. With the help of this project, steelhead trout may reclaim their native range throughout southern Orange County. Thank you for listening.